At Christmas Eve dinner, my son-in-law's father laughed at my 39 years as a plumber, and my family let him. My daughter stared at her plate. My wife said nothing. Then Evan leaned back, looked me in the eye, and said, "If you don't like it, pay the bill and leave." So I did. I paid the bill, stood up, and walked out without raising my voice. They probably thought I was humiliated. Maybe they thought I'd cool off and come crawling back by New Year's. They were wrong, because somewhere between that restaurant and my driveway, I made one decision about my money, my help, and my place in that family. And none of them knew who would panic first. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 67 years old, and I spent 39 years as a master plumber before I retired. I've crawled under houses in January, stood ankle-deep in flooded basements at 3 in the morning, and rebuilt water lines for families who never knew my name after I packed and left. I never needed them to. On Christmas Eve of 2024, I drove 40 minutes into Columbus for dinner with my family at an upscale steakhouse Claire had chosen. Susan had texted me 3 days earlier. "Dress nice. Evan made reservations." So I did. I pressed my gray slacks, polished my shoes, and put on the charcoal wool blazer I had owned for 16 years. I wore it to my brother's funeral, Claire's college graduation, and the courthouse the day she married Evan Bennett. When I walked into the restaurant, Richard Bennett saw me first. Evan's father was 70, retired from commercial property development, and carried himself like every room had been waiting for him. He wore a cream pocket square, a gold watch, and the satisfied expression of a man who enjoyed being noticed. Evan looked me over. "Dan," he said, loud enough for the next table to hear. "Glad you made it. Though I thought you might dress up a little more. Christmas dinner, not an emergency pipe call." Richard laughed. Claire lowered her eyes to her wine glass. Susan tightened her fingers around hers but said nothing. I pulled out my chair and sat down. "Merry Christmas," I said. Richard spent the next 20 minutes asking whether retirement meant I was finally done crawling under sinks and fixing toilets for other people. He called my woodworking little projects and asked whether I missed having something useful to do. I answered without giving him much. Then Evan joined in. He talked about acquisitions, development financing, and the waterfront project he hoped to close after New Year's. Richard praised every sentence. Claire smiled when expected. Susan touched her drink. Eventually, Evan leaned toward me. "You've earned the right to relax, Dan," he said. "Let the rest of us handle the serious stuff now." I set down my coffee. I don't need anyone handling things for me. His smile thinned. "Later." He glanced at my blazer. "Does it ever bother you?" he asked. "Showing up somewhere like this dressed like that?" I looked at the coat, then at him. "No," I said, "not at all." And that was when I stopped trying to enjoy dinner and started paying attention. Richard waited until the entrees arrived before he stopped pretending his questions were friendly. He cut into his steak, took one bite, and looked across the table at me. 39 years, he said. "That's a long time to spend under houses, in basements, fixing leaks nobody sees. I suppose there's something respectable about sticking with one thing that long." The word respectable came out coated in pity. I kept eating. Richard continued. "But there's a ceiling to that kind of work, isn't there? You fix a pipe, replace a valve, clear your line, and then you go home. Next day, somebody else calls, same thing again." Evans smiled into his wine. Richard leaned back. "In real estate, you build assets, you build a name, you create something people remember." That was when Evan took over. "That's really the difference, Dan," he said. "Legacy." Claire's fork stopped halfway to her plate. Evan did not notice. "In 20 years, people can point to a development I built. They can see the buildings, the investments, the portfolio." He tilted his head. "What does a plumber leave behind?" The table went quiet. I thought about the elementary school where I had replaced corroded water lines before they failed, the apartment building I kept from flooding during a January freeze, the nursing home boiler system I rebuilt with Mike over 2 brutal weekends. I thought about 38 apprentices I had trained, men who now ran crews, companies, and jobs of their own. Then I looked at Evan. "Clean water," I said. "Dry homes. Families who never have to think about what's behind their walls." Richard gave a small shrug. Evan waited 2 seconds, then asked his father about the condo in Naples. Just like that. My answer was dismissed. I understood something then. They had not asked because they wanted to know. They had asked because they had already decided the answer. And for the first time that night, I stopped defending myself entirely. I finished my steak while Richard and Evan talked as though I had already left the table. Richard told another story about a deal in Florida. Evan laughed. Claire smiled when expected. Susan drank water and kept looking at me like she wanted me to understand something she refused to say aloud. Then, Evan set down his glass. Not hard, just deliberately enough to make everyone stop. "I'm going to say something," he said. Nobody answered. He leaned forward and looked at me. "Dan, you're a decent man. You worked hard. You provided for your family. Nobody is taking that away from you." I knew what was coming. But this isn't your world." His hand moved around the room, the dark wood. White tablecloths, expensive wine, people dressed for Christmas Eve. "This world runs on relationships, reputation, presentation. You spent your life in basements and crawl spaces. You came home smelling like copper, pipe compound, and whatever was leaking that day." Susan's face tightened. "Evan," she said. He raised one hand. "I'm not insulting him. I'm being honest." Then, he looked at my charcoal blazer. A man wearing the same coat he had before his daughter finished college, after spending nearly 40 years fixing other people's toilets and pipes, doesn't suddenly become part of this because he sits at the table. Claire went pale. Richard stopped smiling. Evan kept going. "That man lowers the whole table." The sentence landed cleanly. No one laughed. I looked at Claire. She stared at the centerpiece. I looked at Susan. Her eyes were wet, but she stayed seated. That hurt more than Evan's words. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. "You know something about plumbing, Evan." His jaw shifted. "A pipe can look perfect from the outside. Clean fittings, fresh paint, everything lined up right." I kept my voice calm. "But corrosion happens where people don't look. Pressure builds behind the wall. By the time somebody notices, the damage has usually been there a long time." Richard looked down. Evan leaned back. "If you're that uncomfortable," he said, "nobody's making you stay." I turned to Susan. "Are you coming home with me?" She looked at Claire, then back at me. "Give me a few minutes, Dan, please." There it was, the real answer. I raised my hand for the waiter. "The check," I said when he came over. "All of it." Evan frowned. "What are you doing?" "Taking your advice." The bill came to $386 before tip. I left $463. The waiter had done nothing wrong. I put on the blazer Evan hated and stood. Claire looked at me. "Dad." I waited. She had nothing else. Susan whispered, "We'll talk at home." I nodded once. "Merry Christmas." Then I walked out alone. The cold hit my face when the restaurant door closed behind me. I sat in my truck without starting it and watched my breath fog the windshield. Somewhere between the parking lot and home, the pressure inside me found its shut-off valve, and I decided what I was no longer willing to keep supplying. Christmas morning arrived quiet. I was on the back porch before sunrise with coffee in my hands and the charcoal blazer hanging over the chair beside me. I had slept 3 hours. What Evan said did not surprise me. Men like him had looked down on tradesmen my entire life. What stayed with me was Claire saying nothing, and Susan choosing to remain at the table. That was the part I could not file away. Around 8, the side gate opened, and Mike Callahan walked into the yard carrying a paper bag from the bakery. Mike and I had known each other for more than 30 years. He had spent most of his working life with the municipal water department, so silence did not make him uncomfortable. He sat beside me. "Karen sent cinnamon bread," he said. We ate without talking. Then I told him everything. Richard's jokes, Evan's speech, Claire looking down, Susan asking for a few more minutes. Mike listened until I finished. Finally, he said, "None of that tells me what you're worth, Dan. It tells me what they're willing to ignore." I stared into my coffee. "The worst part is, I'm still paying for half their life." Mike looked over. I listed it. Auto insurance, their phone lines, repairs at their house. Things I had started covering years ago when Claire and Evan were struggling. Then, never stopped. "I'm financing people who just told me I'm beneath them." Mike nodded once. "Then why are you still financing them?" My phone buzzed. "Claire." I turned it face down. For the first time since dinner. The answer felt simple. "I'm not," I said. The day after Christmas, I went to the garage before breakfast. Sorting tools gave my hands something useful to do while my mind caught up. Wrenches by size, copper fittings in labeled bins, thread sealant, cutters, spare valves, everything where it belonged. Around noon, Karen Callahan came through the side gate carrying a pot of chicken soup. "Mike told me," she said. That was all. We sat at the kitchen table while the soup warmed. Karen had known Claire since she was 8 years old. She had watched birthday parties, school concerts, graduations, and the years when my daughter still called our house home. A neighbor named Pete Holloway walked past outside and spotted us through the window. He waved, took a picture for the neighborhood Facebook group, and kept moving. 40 minutes later, Claire called. She did not ask if I had slept. She did not ask whether I was all right. Dad, Pete posted a picture of you and Karen. Some of Evan's clients are in that group. I looked across the table at Karen. So, it just looks strange. People are going to wonder why you're spending Christmas week with neighbors instead of your family. A neighbor brought me soup. I know. But Evan's business depends on appearances. Could you ask Pete to take it down? Something inside me went still. Claire, your husband humiliated me in a restaurant on Christmas Eve. 2 days later. You're calling because you're worried a bowl of soup might hurt his image. Silence. Do you hear yourself? Dad. I didn't mean. I know what you meant. I ended the call. Karen studied me for a moment. She knows what she's doing, she said. She just hasn't decided whether she's sorry yet. That sentence stayed with me afterward. 2 days after Christmas, Susan packed an overnight bag and drove to Claire's house. She said she was helping with a few things. I did not ask which things. After her car disappeared at the end of the street, I went into my study, opened the leather notebook where I tracked household expenses, and started reading. Evan and Claire's vehicles were still on my auto policy. $455 a month. Their phone lines were still attached to mine. $165. Then there was the open contractor authorization I had set up years earlier, allowing repairs at their house to be charged directly to my account. That averaged another $270 each month. $890 every month. I stared at the number for a while, not because I was angry, because I finally understood what it meant. I opened the insurance portal first and removed Evan's truck, then Claire's SUV. The system confirmed they would receive formal notice before coverage ended. Next, I separated both phone lines into independent accounts. Service would continue. Billing would no longer come to me. Then I called the contractor. Anything requested at the Bennett house goes directly to Evan from now on, I said. No problem. Dan, that was it. No speech, no warning call, no dramatic message. I was not taking anything that belonged to them. I was simply ending access to what belonged to me. I wrote one line beneath the total, not punishment, correction. A correction I should have made years earlier. Then, I closed the notebook. Noah's 10th birthday was in the middle of January. Susan called before the party and told me he had asked twice whether I was coming. That settled it. I spent Saturday in the garage finishing his gift, a wooden pedal cart I had been building since November. Solid pine frame, rubber tires, hand-cut steering linkage, painted red because Noah once told me red made everything faster. When I carried it into the private room at the restaurant, Noah saw me first. Grandpa, he ran straight into me, then froze when he noticed the cart. You made that, every piece. He ran his hands over the wood like it was something rare. For a moment, nothing else mattered. Then Evan appeared. Nice work, he said. Can I talk to you for a minute? He guided me toward a quieter corner, where a leather folder sat on a table. I've got a development deal, he said. Strong property, good projections. But the bank wants another guarantor on the primary note. How much? $525,000. He said it like he was asking me to lend him a ladder. You want me to co-sign? It's mostly procedural. Your credit profile would make the financing cleaner. I almost laughed. Christmas Eve, I had lowered his table. 3 weeks later, my name was valuable enough to secure $500,000. Across the room, Noah was showing Susan how the steering worked. I picked up my coat. Evan's expression changed. Dan, think about it. I already did. The answer is no. His jaw tightened. You haven't even seen the numbers. It was no before you asked. Noah grabbed my sleeve when I said goodbye. Stay longer. Grandpa, I wanted to, but boundaries cost something. I hugged him, promised I would see him soon, and walked out alone. The last Tuesday of January, Evan showed up at my house furious. He came into the kitchen holding his phone like evidence. Our insurance is gone. The contractor wants my credit card. Claire's phone bill changed. What did you do? I poured coffee. I stopped paying expenses that belonged to you. His face tightened. You could have warned us. I did. He stared at me. The insurance change was submitted December 29th. Written notice reached your address January 11th. Today is January 30th. I set my cup down. The phone company texted you on December 30th. The contractor authorization ended the same week. Evan looked away. He had not read any of it. We're tight on cash right now, he said. The development deal is consuming everything. That sounds like something worth considering, before asking someone else to guarantee $525,000. His eyes snapped back to mine. So, this is revenge. No, I leaned against the counter. This is me no longer financing decisions I don't make. He started listing the mortgage, Noah's school, business expenses, all the reasons the timing was unfair. I let him finish. Then I said, "You're 42 years old, you have a career. Claire has a career. I'm not stopping you from doing anything. I'm simply not paying for it." For once, Evan had no polished answer. He stood, picked up his phone, and left the coffee untouched. I listened to his truck pull away. Then I opened my notebook and wrote 3 words, held the line. I closed it and went back outside. The firewood still needed splitting. By February, Richard Bennett had started telling his version of the story. According to Mike, Richard said I had abandoned my family, cut Claire and Evan off without warning, and forced Susan to stay with them because home had become uncomfortable. Susan had been back twice. She had eaten dinner, watered her herbs, and taken 2 sweaters from the closet. But Richard was not talking to people who knew me enough to recognize the lie. Then Mike told me something else. "Richard's asking Evan for $950 a month," he said. I looked up. For what? To keep the Naples condo. Richard's retirement savings were not nearly as impressive as the stories he told over wine. The condo fees, insurance, and travel costs were eating through what he had left, and Evan had been covering the difference. I sat with that. Richard had mocked my pension. Evan had mocked my trade. Yet, the structure underneath both men was the same. They were standing on money someone else provided and calling the view their achievement. Mike leaned back. "You paid for part of Evan's life. Evan paid for part of Richard's. Everybody above you acted independent because you were carrying weight underneath them." He was right. But I did not want Richard ruined. I did not want Evan ruined. I wanted Susan home. I wanted Claire to remember who she was before protecting Evan's image became more important than protecting her father again. I was not trying to destroy the family. I was trying to stop holding up a structure that had forgotten who was supporting it. Noah came over on a Saturday morning in February with his backpack half open and one shoelace dragging behind him. We spent the first hour turning soil in the raised garden bed. Susan's tulips were just beginning to push green tips through the dirt. Then Noah said, "Grandpa, our hot water stopped last week." I kept working. "What happened?" Dad said something broke behind the laundry room wall. A plumber came and said the manifold was corroded and one shutoff had failed. He looked at me. "It's going to cost $5,300. I rested the cultivator against my knee. "That's a serious repair." Dad was mad. I imagine he was. Noah dug at the soil with his trowel. "Mom said we shouldn't ask you for help right now because you and Dad are having a disagreement." He frowned. "But you know how to fix pipes." "I do. So why would Dad pay someone else?" Children ask questions adults spend years avoiding. I looked toward the house. I could have done the repair in a weekend for the cost of materials. I knew the system in Evan's house. I had worked on it twice before without charging him $1. But neither he nor Claire had called. And I was not going to volunteer. "That's something your dad gets to decide," I said. Noah nodded, accepting the answer, even if he did not understand it. A few minutes later, he slipped his dirty glove into my hand. "Can we show Grandma the tulips when they bloom?" My throat tightened. "Yes, buddy, we can." After he went inside for cookies, I pulled out my notebook. February, $5,300 paid to someone else. I stared at the line. Not victory, just market price. The skill Evan had mocked now had a number attached to it. Tax season arrived in early March, and I handled it the way I handled every complicated job in order, with every number checked twice. That was how I found the document. It was clipped behind an insurance packet from 2022, a limited financial authorization carrying my signature and naming Evan as the person allowed to act on one of my savings accounts. I remembered him bringing papers to the house. He had told me they were connected to an insurance update. I had trusted him. The account had held $17,200. Now it held $9,850. $7,350 had disappeared through 3 withdrawals I did not recognize. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at my hands. They were steady. 39 years around pressurized systems had taught me something useful when something fails. Panic makes the damage worse. Shut off the source. Isolate the damage. Drain the pressure. Then, repair what can be saved. I called Peter Collins, an attorney Mike trusted, and explained what I had found. He told me not to assume anything yet. The paperwork, the timing, and how the money had been used all mattered. That was enough for me. I copied every statement, saved the authorization, and moved the remaining money into a new account in my name alone. Then, I reviewed every financial access point Evan had ever been given. I was not interested in courtroom revenge. I wanted one thing first: no more leaks, no more hidden access, no more trust without verification. By sunset, the money I had was protected. What Evan had already taken would be dealt with later. April pushed winter out of the yard. Susan's tulips had opened along the south fence, red, yellow, and one purple bloom that looked black in the shade. Noah came over on Saturday to help me replace 2 rotten fence boards. He handed me screws, held the level crooked, and asked questions about everything. After a while, we sat on the back steps with water and coffee. "Grandpa," he said, "Dad told Uncle Mark you're useless now that you're retired." I set my cup down. Noah frowned before I could answer. "But that doesn't make sense. You fixed this fence? You built my cart? You know plumbing? You fixed our kitchen sink before? How can somebody who knows all that be useless?" I looked at the rotten board lying beside my boot. "You know why this wood failed? Because it rotted." "Right. But rot doesn't mean the wood was always bad. Sometimes good wood sits too long in bad conditions. Too much moisture. No airflow. Nobody notices until the damage shows." Noah studied the board. Then he looked at me. "So maybe you weren't useless." I waited. "Maybe you were just around people who forgot what you were worth." That one landed harder than anything Evan had said. I looked toward the tulips. Noah followed my eyes. "Grandma should see them." "She should. When is she coming home?" I had no answer worth giving a 10-year-old. After Claire picked him up, I stood beside the purple tulip for minutes. Then I went inside and called Susan. She answered on the second ring. "The tulips came up," I said. "Even the purple one." Silence. Then her voice softened. I was hoping it would. I looked out the kitchen window. "Come home, Susan." Another silence. This one felt different. "Okay," she whispered. Susan came home on a Wednesday afternoon in late April with a bag and no speech prepared. I was making soup when she stepped into the kitchen. "Hungry?" I asked. "Yes." She washed her hands, set the table, and we ate without forcing the conversation we both knew was waiting. Later, she went outside and stood beside the tulips for 10 minutes. I watched from the window. She touched the purple one with 2 fingers. By May, the house had found a rhythm. Then my phone rang. "Daniel Mercer." "Yes. My name is Laura Jensen. I'm project director at Great Lakes Mechanical Group. Mike Callahan gave me your number." I smiled despite myself. "What did Mike say?" "That I'd be an idiot not to call you." That sounded like Mike. Laura explained the job. Her company was rebuilding the plumbing infrastructure for a 396-unit residential redevelopment on the north side. The existing system had been patched for decades, and the consultants on staff kept giving her answers that looked good on paper but failed in the field. "I need someone who's actually worked inside these walls," she said, "not someone who only supervised people who did." That sentence stayed with me. The contract was 6 months. Independent consulting, $92,000. After we hung up, I found Susan in the garden. "They want to hire me." She looked up. "For plumbing." For knowing what 39 years taught me. Her face changed. Pride. Plain and unqualified. That evening, I called Mike. "92,000, I said. He laughed. "For the useless retired plumber." "For the useless retired plumber," I said. By the first Saturday in June, Susan and I had settled back into the house without pretending Christmas Eve had disappeared. That evening, we sat on the porch after dinner while the last light moved across the garden. Susan spoke first. "I should have left with you that night." I looked at her. "When you asked me to go home, I told myself I was keeping the peace," she said. "But what I was really doing was asking you to absorb the humiliation so the rest of us wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable." Her voice stayed steady. "I chose the easier seat. I chose wrong. I'm sorry, Dan." I let the silence sit. She did not excuse Claire. She did not blame Evan. She did not ask me to forget it. "It's a start," I said. "A good one." Susan reached for my hand. After a while, she told me Evan wanted to come talk. "Things are tight," she said. "Claire says he wants to clear the air." I nodded. Then I made one thing clear. "I'll take care of you. Claire is my daughter, and my door stays open to her. Noah will always have a place here." I looked at Susan. "But Evan does not get another dollar from me. No bills, no loans, no co-signing, no access to my accounts. That part is finished. Not anymore. Not after Christmas." Susan did not argue. I know, she said. Then, she told me something she had overheard at Claire's house weeks earlier. Evan had said, I underestimated him. I looked out at the garden. He wasn't wrong. Evan and Claire came on a Sunday afternoon 2 weeks later. Evan arrived carrying grocery store flowers and wearing an open-collar shirt that looked deliberately casual. Claire stood half a step behind him, arms folded loosely, eyes already red. We sat in the living room. Evan leaned forward. Dan, I owe you an apology. Christmas Eve was disrespectful. I said things I shouldn't have said, and I've had months to think about that. The words were polished. The pauses were polished. I had watched him sell too many deals not to recognize a presentation. Then Claire spoke. Dad, I knew it was wrong while it was happening. Her voice cracked. I watched him humiliate you, and I still sat there. I was afraid of what would happen if I challenged him. I'm sorry. I believed her. I looked at my daughter. We'll be all right, I said. You and I will always be all right. She started crying. Then I turned to Evan. You didn't come here because Christmas still bothers you. His jaw tightened. You came because the numbers do. That's not fair. I think it is. I kept my voice calm. The insurance is gone. The phones are yours. The repairs are yours. The loan is yours. That arrangement is over. Evan sat back. For the first time, the negotiation disappeared from his face. Fine, he said. We'll figure it out ourselves. I know you will. I held his eyes. You're more capable than you've ever allowed yourself to prove. Claire hugged me before they left. Evan waited by the door. I poured him coffee and set it beside him. He picked it up. No handshake. No forgiveness. But no war either. The door was still open. The old privileges were not. What came next was up to him. By July, the house began to feel larger than the life Susan and I were living inside it. 4 bedrooms, a dining room we rarely used, a yard Susan loved but no longer wanted to spend weekends maintaining. One Saturday morning, I brought it up over coffee. I think we should sell. Susan looked around the kitchen, then back at me. Because of Evan? No. I shook my head. Too much house for the life still flowing through it. She smiled at the plumbing metaphor. What would we buy? A smaller condo. South-facing balcony. Enough room for your herbs, less yard, less maintenance. Susan thought for a moment. Call the realtor Monday. The house sold in 6 days to a couple with a 5-year-old daughter. That mattered to me. I wanted the place to become somebody's beginning, not remain our monument to what had ended. We spent August packing. Claire came over alone one Saturday and helped Susan wrap dishes while I cleared shelves in my study. Later, she brought me coffee. I used to do homework in here, she said. I remember. You never made me feel stupid when I didn't understand math. You weren't stupid. You just needed it explained differently. Claire looked down at the cup. I know that now. Moving day arrived in early October. The truck was loaded by noon. Across the street, Evan stood beside his car with his hands in his pockets. I had not invited him. He raised one hand. I gave him a nod. No speech. No victory. I locked the front door, handed Susan the keys to our place, and drove away. Some systems are not repaired by forcing old parts to keep carrying a load they were never meant to carry forever. By the second Saturday of December, Susan and I had been in the condo for 2 months. It was smaller than the old house and better suited to the life we actually had. The balcony faced south, and Susan had already filled it with rosemary, thyme, and 2 stubborn pots of basil she refused to admit were finished for the year. Mike came by that morning carrying cinnamon rolls. We sat outside with coffee while a maintenance worker below tested the courtyard irrigation lines before winter shut off. How's the consulting job? Mike asked. Almost done. Final report next week. And, I smiled, they found 30 years of patchwork hiding behind good-looking walls. Mike laughed. Sounds familiar. Claire called every Sunday now. Sometimes we talked about Noah. Sometimes about nothing important. That mattered more than I expected. Evan had texted twice asking if I would meet him for coffee. I had not answered yet. Not because I hated him. Because I no longer needed to rush toward anyone just because they finally wanted access to me. Mike took another bite. Richard moved back from Naples. I looked over. What happened? Evan stopped sending the $950. Condo became too expensive. I absorbed that quietly. A year earlier, Richard had used Naples as proof that he understood success better than I did. Now it was gone. I felt no satisfaction. That's his problem to solve, I said. My phone buzzed. Noah appeared on video. His hair wild. A Christmas tree behind him. Grandpa, we picked the tree ourselves this year. Dad said we're doing more stuff ourselves now. I looked at Mike. He raised one eyebrow. Noah kept talking. Are you and Grandma coming Christmas Eve? The question landed gently, 1 year earlier. Christmas Eve had been the night I was told I did not belong at the table. Now my grandson was asking me to come back. We're thinking about it, I said, after the call ended. I looked down at the courtyard. The maintenance worker opened a valve. Water moved through the irrigation line evenly. No spray, no leak, no pressure loss. Susan stepped onto the balcony with tea. I looked at her. Then at the herbs. Then at the water moving exactly where it was supposed to go. That was when I understood what holding the line had really done. It had not emptied my life. It had stopped the leaks. And what remained was finally mine to choose. At 67, I had my wife, my grandson, useful work, a true friend, and peace I no longer had to purchase by making everyone else comfortable. That was enough. Looking back, I made one mistake for too long. I confused generosity with obligation. I thought being a good father meant fixing, paying, rescuing, and absorbing every cost without complaint. It doesn't. You can love your family and still draw a line. You can forgive without reopening every door. If someone treats your love like unlimited access, you are allowed to close the valve. Dignity is not cruelty. Sometimes peace begins when you finally stop funding your own disrespect.